Welcome to Trench Diaries and welcome to the first episode of a new book. Today I present you Blood, Dust and Snow, Diaries of a Panzer Commander. We follow the life of Lieutenant Friedrich Sander, a member of the 11th Panzer-Regiment of the Wehrmacht. He served in the armored units from 1937 up to the end of 1942 when he was wounded and sent back to Germany. The book is a transcript of his diaries, which were found by historian and author Roger Moorhouse. I will make them accessible to you in this format. If you are a returning viewer, welcome back and thank you for being with me again. You know how it goes. Sit back, relax and enjoy a beverage of your choice. If you are new to this channel, this is Trench Diaries, where I read to you stories and diaries from men of all walks of life who served as soldiers during various wars. I will also end all my episodes with the so-called after-action report, where I present some additional information and interject some personal anecdotes, as I have served myself and am a reserve captain of the German army. The book will begin with Moorhouse describing how he came upon the diaries and a short description of our protagonist. This is important because the man was, at least in the run-up to and during the beginning of the war, a quite ardent Nazi. Keep this in mind, as it is a stark contrast to the other authors we've heard so far. There will be race-based comments and there will be praise of the regime. But remember, all I'm doing here is read you the diaries of a man that served during exceptional times. It is neither a support of Nazi ideology, nor is it supposed to point fingers at anyone. It is the story of a man, written on paper, and it gives you a perspective of the reality of things back then. As such, it is a historical document that is written in the format of diary entries. That being said, I'm sure some of you wonder why the thumbnail is pink. Well, the traditional branch of service color of the Panzertruppe is indeed pink, at least in Germany. Why that is the case is a matter of debate. Some say it is because it is an amalgam of the infantry, which back then used white as their color, and the artillery, which was red. If you mix them both, pink is the obvious result. Others say that it mirrors the colors of the very old Prussian infantry regiments number 18 and number 40, which were commanded by Prussian princes during the 7 Years' War. In the modern armed forces, there are other theories. I myself, being a member of the gold-wearing armored reconnaissance branch, have heard a lot. The most popular saying goes something like this: why do the tankers wear pink on their uniforms all day? Well, because they could choose the color themselves. Here, it is heavily implying an affinity for man love. Anyway, like I said, the book begins with a short introduction by the author and then starts with the individual diary entries. With no further ado, I am your host Jay. Roll the intro. Introduction. It was the number which first caught my eye, just a simple 5-digit number written in blue indelible pencil on the cover of a notebook at the top of a small pile of worn and frayed notebooks. It was a Feldpostnummer, a code the German military used as identification for its military mail service. Closer inspection showed that there were 11 books and an accumulation of loose pages unceremoniously held together by a rusty paperclip. Flipping through the pages and looking more closely at the neat handwriting, I knew that I was looking at the wartime diaries of a German officer, Lieutenant Friedrich Wilhelm Sander of Panzerregiment 11. A brief negotiation with the militaria dealer followed, and a few days later the diaries were safely on my office table. Closer inspection showed that the diaries were special. Not only was the diarist a keen, even obsessive observer and talented writer, he also thought little of the rules that any campaigning diarist was bound to follow. Today, there is a persistent rumor that in the German army the keeping of a diary was strictly prohibited. That is untrue. In fact, it was a popular pastime for Germans, an activity that peaked in the 20th century and the period of the World Wars. During moments of abrupt change, in personal crises, or under the influence of sudden revolutionary events or brutal wars, the keeping of a diary or journal offered a special and very personal form of coping and served as an antidote to loneliness and despair. It is more the case that in Germany, writing in war, be it in the form of letters or diaries, had a long tradition. From the end of the First World War, countless diaries were published, which were then replaced in the 1940s by a plethora of Völkisch national war diaries celebrating the war and German feats of arms. Journaling was not only strongly supported by the National Socialists, but was also increasingly used for propaganda purposes. Even frontline reports of the propaganda formations were often written in the form of diaries, and at the beginning of the war, German soldiers were encouraged to keep personal journals. For example, in 1941, the Gau Verlag der NSDAP published a prefabricated Kriegstagebuch which, according to the advertisement, contained room for photos, a printed war chronicle, and a calendar for your own entries. It also contained 63 pages of the best paper and forms for the home addresses of comrades. The National Socialist appeal to contribute to a heroic historiography of the Second World War through personal autobiographical memories prompted thousands of German soldiers, whom themselves had grown up reading the martial diaries, autobiographies, and letters of their fathers and grandfathers, to keep personal journals on campaign. Nevertheless, there were certain rules, written and unwritten, to adhere to, in particular if the diarist was a frontline soldier. It was strictly prohibited to take a diary or any other personal correspondence to the front lines, where they could potentially fall into enemy hands. It was prohibited to mention names, locations, to write in detail about military matters, to criticize the regime or the military. All this, however, was clearly nothing Friedrich Wilhelm Sander was concerned about. Being a Panzermann, a tank man, he could usually be found in the front line and often far beyond it, deep in enemy-held territory. This position did not stop him from recording his experiences and thoughts in his journal whenever there was time, almost daily, during periods of rest, in quieter moments, and even in the turret of his tank during the advance and very close to the fighting. And neither did he hold back from criticizing his comrades, his direct superiors, the general conduct of the war, or from making critical political commentary. This is even more interesting because Sander was a National Socialist and a willing tool and crusader for the regime. Friedrich Sander was born in Graudenz in German West Prussia on the shores of the Vistula River in 1916. When the regulations of the Treaty of Versailles became effective on January 23, 1920, and the city was reincorporated under its Polish name Grudziądz into the reborn Polish state, the Sander family, like most of the city's German population, chose to leave their home and resettled in Osnabrück in the province of Hanover, which is today in Lower Saxony. Sander attended the city's famous Carolinum, Germany's oldest grammar school, founded by Charlemagne, king of the Franks, in 804 AD. Most likely forced by his family's financial situation, which was not unusual during this time, he left the Carolinum early and was apprenticed to a merchant in Osnabrück. As a boy, Sander was a member of the Völkisch National Bündische Jugend and later, before or after its prohibition and dissolution is unclear, joined the Hitlerjugend. Shortly after his 18th birthday, Sander joined the Allgemeine SS and with it the National Socialist Party. After service in the Reich Labor Service, he was drafted for compulsory military service on October 1, 1937, and about a month later trained as a radio operator in the newly raised Panzerregiment 11 in Paderborn. After further training as a tank driver and later tank gunner, Sander was promoted to Gefreiter and set firmly on the path to become a reserve officer in the Wehrmacht, a goal which he achieved in 1939. He took part in the annexation of the Sudetenland in October of 1938, but not in the German attack on Poland in 1939, at which time, much to Sander's dismay, he served in the Regimental Replacement Battalion. Nor did Sander see any action in Germany's campaign in the West, in the Low Countries and France in 1940, when he remained garrisoned in Germany. 11 of Sander's diaries survive, and it is clear that there was once at least one more written during his time as an instructor in the Kampfschule, which is the combat school, in Niš, in Serbia in 1944, of which a few loose pages survive. It seems, however, that he reserved his writing and observational skills for those periods during which he was on campaign, starting with the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June of 1941. During quiet periods when on leave at home or during longer peaceful spells in occupied France, for instance during Panzerregiment 11's rehabilitation period in France in the spring of 1942, Sander's voice falls silent. Sander tells us that he is writing for a purpose, and the boredom of everyday life, no matter if private or military, seemingly was not part of that purpose. The Panzermann documented the great events that played out before him and his own role within them, but apparently for no audience other than himself. When at Tretjakova on January the 14th of 1942 he received a hammering by the Red Army, he wonders whether he should continue to preserve the whole drama in his diary for posterity. As a kind of documentary for some future reader, it is clearly just rhetoric. Sander's diaries are not only awash with critical remarks about his fellow officers, his superiors on German strategy and tactics, even Adolf Hitler and Jupp Goebbels, they also include vivid descriptions of the violence and suffering experienced by both sides during the campaign, the multitude of German casualties and atrocities conducted by the German army against Russian prisoners of war and the civilian population. Of course, Sander knew that he could never present his writings to a wider audience, and his goal was not the documentation of Germany's struggle against Bolshevism. Only once, in a new diary which he opens on November 15, 1942, while on a train taking him from rural France back to the harsh reality of war on the Eastern Front, does he begin to write with the intention of someday sharing a description of the sights we see, of the fighting we experience, and of the tribulations we face with his newlywed wife, Ruth. He does, however, quickly revert to his usual way of writing and continues to do so only for himself and for the cathartic experience of putting pen to paper. Finding the words to describe what I have experienced during that time, is that even possible? I don't know, but I will try, even if it's just to give myself some clarity and to unburden my mind. He writes on December 28, 1942. In stark contrast to the vast majority of German soldiers' memoirs, autobiographies and diaries published after the end of war, Sander's diaries are not agenda-driven. They were not written or edited to fit a political or social zeitgeist or to appeal to the tastes of a certain kind of audience. Sander's diaries offer a totally genuine and honest glimpse into the mind and world of a highly politicized young officer of the German Panzerwaffe during the first half of the Second World War, and as such, they are totally unique. During the war, Friedrich Wilhelm Sander was decorated with the Panzer Assault Badge, the Tank Destruction Badge for the single-handed destruction of an enemy tank with handheld explosives, both classes of the Iron Cross, and on February 23, 1943, with the German Cross in gold. We do not know much about Friedrich Wilhelm Sander's experiences after the dissolution of the Kampfschule in Nisch, or even about his time there. He was probably again deployed in combat, and we know that he was taken prisoner by the US Army in 1945. He survived the war, and after his death, the diaries were probably acquired by a member of the Veterans Association of Panzerregiment 11. Extracts were published in 1987 by the regimental historian Oberleutnant Michael Schadewitz, who had been given access to a set of photocopies of some of the diaries, and to whose kind assistance we owe some of the more important photos, including those showing Sander himself, used in this publication. In my translation of the diaries, I have retained Sander's use of German names for places, though I have made changes to his sometimes erratic spelling to make things consistent. For authenticity, I have also retained his use of language that would nowadays be offensive. I have provided the footnotes to give some brief explanations of terms or phrases that may be unfamiliar. 1. April 21, 1938 to January 24, 1939. On October 12, 1937, Panzerregiment 11 was raised in Sennelager under its commander, Oberleutnant Diplom-Ingenieur Phillips, as part of the army build-up. This was the first time since the occupation of the Rhineland by German troops that a tank regiment was stationed in Westphalia. Due to the regulations of the 4-year plan and the temporarily prevailing shortage of raw materials, the regiment's new barracks in Paderborn had not yet been completed. Thus, the regiment had to move to the Sennelager training area, which was not very suitable for the accommodation of a tank regiment due to its original design as a training area for mounted troops. Soldiers from the various regions of Germany had been transferred to Sennelager, where they formed the core of the new regiment. In Hanover, on October the 27th, the Reich Minister of War, Field Marshal Werner von Blomberg, presented the young regiment with its standards, which were then ceremonially brought into Sennelager. 4 weeks later, the first recruits, Friedrich Wilhelm Sander among them, arrived to complete their 2-year period of service. The focus of the upcoming training was to familiarize the young recruits with their weapon, the tank. At the beginning, however, there was a shortage of almost everything. Vehicles and materials were scarce, and the accommodation was inadequate, making the training of the recruits more than difficult. For the recruits, the average day began at 5:30 a.m. with early morning PT. This was followed by time for bodily hygiene, with cold water of course, and breakfast. At 7 a.m. the theory lessons began, given by the officers of the regiment. The soldier's oath, duties of the soldier, command and obedience, cartography, structure of the army, counter-espionage, discipline and disciplinary rules and similar topics were covered. Then followed NCO lessons on a variety of topics such as behavior towards superiors, saluting, rank insignia, weaponry, dress code, shooting practice, equipment, first technical instructions and the like. A short break was followed by drill without and with the Carbine 98, weapons drill, shooting practice, general infantry service, marching and cross-country exercises. This duty on the parade ground and in the camp area was only interrupted by a 90-minute lunch break and usually ended between 4 and 5 p.m. This was followed in the barracks by weapon cleaning and mending sessions and repeated room, uniform and locker inspections which ended between 6 and 8 p.m. After the first 5 weeks, there was training on the tank as a driver, gunner or radio operator. This hard period of basic training ended in March of 1938 with the final recruit inspection. From then on, the unloved formal service and the daily harassment were replaced by regular service as Panzermänner, the training in group and platoon formations as gunners, radio operators or drivers, as signalmen, medics, supply men or in the workshop company. Those destined to become NCOs or officer candidates received additional marksmanship lessons, tactical instruction and general schooling in a variety of subjects. Tactical instruction was conducted by the company commanders or one of the company officers and consisted of, among other things, cartography, preparation of reports and sketches, firing from the tank on the training ground, firing on the move, fighting methods of the armored combat vehicles, combined arms tactics, sandbox exercises, command techniques, and additional terrain training. In addition, the NCO candidates received general instruction in politics, history, party affairs, racial politics, and other subjects, and every week there was a 15-minute special lecture to train and consolidate personal conduct in front of comrades and superiors. In early April of 1938, the regiment started to move into its new garrison in Paderborn, even though some of the construction work was still not complete, and much of the interior furnishings were not in place. At first, there was no running water, no electricity and no heating. As the weather at that time of year was still cold, especially at night, steam locomobiles were used to power the heating in the accommodation blocks. The roads were unpaved, the vehicle hangars still missing roofs, and because the kitchens were not yet operational, food had to be prepared in the field kitchens in the open. It would take until the beginning of 1939 for the construction work to be completed. In Paderborn, technical training increased and driving lessons were given to as many men as possible. At the time, German military driving training was among the best and most thorough in the world and included intensive technical and mechanical training, during which each driver learned how to repair his vehicle with the available onboard resources and without the assistance of the maintenance platoon. These were skills which would prove vital during the German army's lightning advances in the first years of the war. Physical exercise was also increased. There were daily sessions of football, handball, athletics and swimming, while the first major field exercises and maneuvers were conducted in the region and beyond. The first of the surviving diaries opens on April the 21st, 1938. April the 21st, 1938. Sennelager. 5 minutes ago, Unteroffizier Behle told me that we are supposed to stay here in our barracks in the Neues Waldlager until June. Since our arrival, we have already been here for over 6 months, and I guess that an additional one won't do much harm either. There is, however, a positive side to it. 10 pfennig more pay per day. That's the desert bonus. No, joking aside, the camp is really nice and I like it here. In the middle of the forest and the awakening nature, the roads and streets are all kept in good order. Our new barracks, however, are not completely finished yet. Not everywhere has running water, and food can only be drawn from the field kitchens. I'd rather stay here in Sennelager for another month. There's not a lot to do now, so shortly after the Easter holidays. Probably because the men who are regularly based here are still on leave, and many of the recruits are being employed in the Wehrmacht Motor Racing Championship. This morning, when 3 of us were sent to the coal depot, we watched the proceedings for a while. Quite interesting. In the evening, we were tasked to rearrange the rooms in the lieutenant's barracks, and while we were there, we could see the motorbikes and cars racing around the corner at the hospital building. They were all completely spattered with dirt and mud, including the drivers. Sadly, the 3 vehicles of our regiment could not participate in this particular race, as our men knew the area too well, which would have given them an advantage during the orientation drive. We all felt very sorry for them, particularly for our Feldwebel Jon, who a few weeks ago had won a silver medal. His start number, painted on white fabric, now adorns the wall of our maintenance workshop. Now, while I am writing this, I am sitting in our mess marveling at the enormous amount of beer consumed by the grunts of Infantry Regiment 64. That, at least in my opinion, is the nice thing about our service branch. There is a lot less boozing. We always have to have a clear head, drivers, the crews and wireless operators. All comrades act accordingly, and only rarely does one run riot. If that happens, well, then they are probably trying to drown the same feeling which I had when I had to leave Osnabrück a couple of days ago. Even though I did drink a lot of coffee, I was still thirsty. Yes, coffee. First at home and then, after my old father had gone back to Hamburg, in the Café Leer, where I waited for Ruth. Ruth, with whom I would have loved to talk without being disturbed. I found a table in a corner, well separated from everyone else, and I guess that is why she did not find me when she came in. I spent half an hour waiting for her, and then, after leaving, ran into her on the way to the station, when there was just enough time for some empty words and the expression of disappointment at having missed one another in the cafe. Maybe the relationship is a waste of time after all, but I guess I have to wait and see. If there's one thing one learns in the army, it is patience. April the 22nd, 1938. Today we have a cushy number again. In the morning, Wahlberg, the little Rhinelander, and I worked in the cellars. In the evening, I had to hand over 2 rooms in Officer Barrack 11 to a lieutenant of Infantry Regiment 109. Later in the evening, 3 of us helped the 2 pay mongrels of our Abteilung to move. One of them, Zahlmeister Mohle, is also from Osnabrück and used to be a student at our grammar school. He is a nice guy, and while packing the boxes, we talked about our time in Osnabrück. Sennelager forms the final stage of the German Army Motor Racing Championships, and it is very interesting to watch the proceedings at the start and at the finish. There are contestants from all 3 service branches, and it was fascinating to see all the motorbikes, cars and lorries being started at 1900. A lot of people had assembled there. Several important people from the Bosch company were shuffling around between the motorbikes with boxes of spark plugs and to assist where they could. Some of them were wearing white trench coats, and God, these light things just looked incredible, just right to swagger around in. Some comrades informed me that these men were directors of Bosch even. I didn't care about that. The best thing today were those coats. I need to get one of those one day. There is sheer excitement among some of the radio operators in our room and the ones chosen to work with race control and the 2 Panzerbefehlswagen. Excitement not only about the race as such, but also about the journalists and the Wochenschau reporters who flocked around the black uniforms, the 2 tanks and the radio sets in great numbers. Unavoidable really that everyone was filmed, and Comrade Erich Lammer's voice was recorded on a wax record. He had to say a few words through his throat microphone, technical terms used in our trade, and the whole recording was later played by the Reichssender Cologne. Wiese was properly envious. He had been boasting about the fact that he had been photographed several times, but I guess Lammers does not begrudge him that small honor. Some news is making the rounds. According to this, all men of the signals platoon in their 2nd year of service are supposed to be transferred to a new regiment which is being raised in Harburg. To Harburg, that would be the ideal patch for me. But for now, we are supposed to stay here in this drill ground until June. I am on leave between June the 3rd and the 8th on Pentecost, and then 4 weeks off to Jüterborg for live firing exercises. Whatever happens, if I stay here or go to Harburg, both options will be good. April the 26th, 1938. Yesterday evening, our two Gefreite have returned from their paternal leave. Moser with his big mouth right in front as usual. Good Lord, the things he claims to have pulled off there. Hähnlein from Schweinfurt immediately started to give us one of his monotonous songs. When I expressed my sadness at the fact that he hadn't unlearned any of his singing skills during his leave, he became angry, told me to shut up, and pointed out that the number of freckles in my face had increased and that I reminded him of a crumb cake. At the moment my eyelids are so dark that it looks as if I have makeup on, just like one of those dames working on the funfair. All due to the dust we stirred up yesterday night while shoveling coals. When we finally arrived here with our diesel and 200 kilos of coal in the bag, we looked like Negroes. But in general, there is just nothing to do. Even less than on the construction site where I worked when I was in the Reich Labor Service. On Saturday, with 5 men on the staff, we had to act as orderlies in the officers' mess, where a comradeship evening was staged for the participants of the races and several invited guests, about 650 people in total. I didn't get any tables to serve, but instead someone hung a small vendor's tray filled with cigarettes and cigars around my neck, and then I was shoved out to sell my wares in the halls of the mess. At 1 a.m. I did the till. 5.5 Reichsmarks in tips. But for that I had to keep my eyes open like a hawk. Several comrades had to pay losses from their own private purse after some officers had made off without paying. I enjoyed the evening. I wasn't on service, and as such I drank everything I could get my hands on. Wine, beer, schnapps, champagne, liquor, apple juice and lemonade. It was good that the kitchen missy had supplied me with a generous dinner, otherwise I might have got into trouble that night. We only arrived back at our room after 3 a.m. When we came in, we were greeted by the sight of Fries's naked white ass glinting in the moonlight. He was deep asleep, and we 3 roared with laughter so loud that the whole floor was woken up. At 3:30 we went to sleep, and after only 90 minutes, badly hungover, we had to get up again for firing practice. Yes, indeed, firing practice on a Sunday. That's how it's done here in the regiment, while the races are taking place during the week. The results were predictable, nothing to write home about. But back to the comradeship evening. The whole show started at 6 p.m. and the guest list included 10 army generals, one of the Luftwaffe, a few admirals and countless other high-ranking officers. Our regimental band in black uniforms played some swell marches, the highlight being the fanfare marches at 11 p.m. Our fanfare blowers and drummers did an amazing job and got lots of applause. There were so many big cheeses there, not only from the military but also from the party, civilians in top industry positions, that we could more or less ignore the junior officers. A lieutenant counts for very little in that kind of company. The Bosch directors I had seen earlier were there as well. The members of the Kriegsmarine left a superb impression, snappy and in superb uniforms. A stark contrast to the wild bunch of the Luftwaffe officers there. I could not help noticing that even the highest Luftwaffe officers were quite young and not as bent by age as some in the army. Both the mariners and the flyers sang lots of cracking songs, and when our band had played a particularly good tune, the boys of the Kriegsmarine started a perfectly timed rocket, which even included whistling. The mariners are great chaps, and they also won several of the races. May the 5th, 1938, Paderborn. Today, I finally have the time to make another entry into this book. I am lying in bed watching 2 of our boys sweeping the room while the Volksempfänger standing on Moser's locker is thundering the beats of the Italian national anthem into the empty corridors outside. Yes, now it is May, Hitler is on a state visit to Italy, and for the last few days our broken Volksempfänger has supplied us with all kinds of reports and music from that beautiful land across the Alps. All via German radio channels, of course. And every evening and up until deep into the night, after the Unteroffizier on duty has made his final round, we are listening to dance music. All the proper hits which are sung and whistled by each and every one of us during and after service. Our current favorite is Im Mai, das sind die Frauen nicht treu, the lyrics of which are something like: In May the women are not faithful, then their heart often loves 2 or even 3. Yes, 1 man to go out with and another one to take home. But please, that is the custom in the month of May. Radio exercises, yes, of those we have 8 or 10 each week, and they are fantastic because they take us out into the surroundings of Paderborn. Our superiors are the best, and it is not rare for us to find ourselves doing absolutely nothing except for enjoying the sunshine, and often we come back to barracks way too late. But our superiors always brief us properly. We exercised at Cowshit Village and then had an unexpected engine breakdown. Understood? And in truth, we were just joyriding around in the 50-kilometer zone. Old Fablewill Metzen, Unteroffizier Schulze, known as Little Muck, and Unteroffizier Reimer are superiors of a kind one doesn't find on every corner. One Tuesday, Unteroffizier Behle and us drove down to Niederrand Obermarsberg, where he visited his girlfriend Hilde. Behle is a proper adulterer. Thomas had to wear his engagement ring, on the right hand of course. Oh, how we laughed. In Obermarsberg we raced through the streets in a manner which made the locals' hair stand on end. The whole place is gloriously situated on a mountaintop. The mountain itself is riddled with tunnels of an ancient copper mine. We walked into one of these tunnels but didn't get very far. Behle, currently without proper employment by the way, would love to join our platoon. And he gets on well with all of us, especially with the Little Muck. Later that evening, while we were having a break, the two had started fooling around, and in the course of the fighting, the Little Muck had thrown a full thermos flask of coffee into Behle's back so hard that it had nearly knocked him over. After that, Behle's attempts to catch Little Muck were spoiled when his sciatica suddenly flared up. That made him even more angry. May the 6th, 1938. We've been out and about again for the entire day. In the morning we were in Weine behind Büren to visit the Reichs-Labour-Service-Abteilung 5161 Wewelsburg, and we also came past the actual Wewelsburg. The drive to Weine took us through difficult terrain and I had to navigate by map, which wasn't exactly easy to do. Metzen was driving me mad with his constant bickering. When we reached that shithole Niedern-Tudorf, I asked our driver to make a brief stop to give me the time to orient myself. That was a mistake, as now everyone started to make fun of me. Did they really teach you nothing in DSS? I replied that at least I had learned to read a map. At Weine we started our work. First local installations with 3 hooks, followed by some more work underground. I had to carry the heavy carrying frame on my back. That was a slog, running after the Kübel for 4 kilometers. Along the roads I had to cover the cables up with turf slabs, and in the curves I had to tie it all up. When I finally reached the terminal station I was soaked with sweat. And all of that work had been good for nothing. Neither was anyone interested. Metzen and the Little Muck had already driven away to do some shopping, to make sure that none of us would starve. On the way back we drove past a female Reich Labour Service camp, which is situated close to Büren, right on the top of a mountain from where one has an excellent view. Metzen ordered us to stop and then started chatting up some of the Reich Labour Service girls. As we had driven in with roaring engines, all the barrack windows were soon lined with girls who had heard the commotion we had caused. After a short while, in which Metzen realized that he wouldn't be able to score there, our wild hunt continued. We learned that the girls hardly got out of the camp as they only had arrived there in April. They could have visitors on Sundays only. That they had only arrived a month ago was well visible, as none of them had turned chubby from all the good food yet. After a difficult drive, we arrived late for lunch, but that didn't matter too much. A couple of hours later we were out again, this time driving to Bad Driburg. The Unteroffiziere Langer, Marx and Little Muck, as well as Feldwebel Metzen, were surprised at the number of pretty girls in the town. We drove to the water tower at the Kreuzberg, pulled off a number of hair-raising stunts with our vehicles, and then, with howling engines, thundered down a very steep and narrow winding path leading down the Kreuzberg before cutting through a quarry. At the other end there were scores of spa guests who shook their heads in disapproval. Then we drove up the Rosenberg, through the spa facilities there to the Reich Labour Service camp, where I spent an hour and a half talking to old comrades. Weissert was still there, while Bohn and Schwarze, both now squad leaders, had returned from school where they had sat their final exams. Jürgens, who had recently become an uncle, was lying on his bed, lazy and disrespectful. They introduced me to the infantry reserve officer candidate who temporarily, but regularly, pleased Lisbeth Bulling last winter. A nice guy. I do hope that he enjoyed the experience. Weissert told me that the first review had gone completely awry. The ancient general responsible for training, this old man who had chalk trickling from his trouser legs, had told them that they hadn't trained their men correctly, and as a punishment there was now a curfew of 4 weeks. When we raced back through the streets of Driburg, I nearly soiled my pants in terror when Little Muck decided to show off his driving skills. We then stopped at a farmhouse to buy eggs. The farmer packed them all in a box, except for 2 which would not fit. And I was also the one who had to carry these 2 eggs when we arrived back at the barracks. One can expect the hooting, cheering and remarks which erupted when I climbed out of the kübel holding the 2 eggs in my hands. May the 10th, 1938. I have been transferred to the regimental staff as a wireless operator. Yesterday I had to report to Lieutenant Ehrenberg. I am not sure if I like it here. It was certainly more cushy on the staff of the 2nd Abteilung. Last Saturday I went on leave for the weekend. What a disappointing waste of time that was, especially so in regards to a certain young lady. When I called her, she told me that she had to go to church on Sunday. After that, we met to go on a stroll where we talked about meaningless things and mostly at cross purposes. Damn, I should really listen to my mother. Now that I am in the army, I should stop trying to live such a solid life as if I was striving to become an Orthodox priest. It is absolute nonsense. Pull yourself together and behave, I say to myself. Don't behave like other comrades and the Unteroffiziere. I have a girlfriend at home and I owe this to her. Girlfriend? More like an acquaintance, really. I can have the same kind of conversation with any other educated girl. And the worst thing is that she doesn't even share my political Weltanschauung, and there is no compromise in that regard. May the 13th, 1938. There is little sense in me being a wireless operator as I am always getting travel sick. Now in the regimental staff, to avoid losing a well-trained wireless operator, they have put me in a Kfz 17 in which one is supposed not to get travel sick so easily because of the good suspension. But then they take roads which can't be described as such anymore, and I nearly puked on my wireless set. Boy oh boy, what a race that was today. The performance of the 8-cylinder Horch is superb. When Comrade Hörsting failed to drive it properly, Lieutenant Wills took the wheel himself. Very quickly after that, I felt so miserable that I had to switch place with Hörsting so that I could at least look out in the direction we were traveling. The wireless work as such, however, went very well. Unteroffizier Pohle was first operator and responsible for the telegraph key, while I, as second operator, had to write, encrypt and decipher the messages. I also worked with the Zielviertafel. I had been rather nervous about all this, but it all went pretty well, even though I felt absolutely awful. May the 16th, 1938. Today at 2000 hours you will report to your Korporalschaftsführer with a washed field cap. That was what Johnny Meyer just said to me. Johnny is the golden blonde Spieß of the regimental staff, and today is a Monday. A Monday typical for a little Lancer like me. It started with uniform inspection and alcohol evaporation hour and ended with another review of all the uniform parts the Spieß objected to. Yesterday I'd been on leave at home, and this morning my bacon-like greasy lid drew the attention of the Spieß. I've just come back from presenting the now clean cap to Unteroffizier Pohle. It passed inspection, and I was allowed to walk free. There's a different wind blowing in the regimental staff. Gone are the days of, "Comrades, please make sure your uniforms are clean and in order. I will have to conduct an inspection soon." The Spieß here just kicks the door open, and then it's, "Corporal, take this down." Today, we've been on tank exercise off der Lied, and it didn't go particularly well, or at least not how Unteroffizier Pohle would have wanted us to perform. But who cares what? Gefreiter Rübsam has just been here and literally forbade me to write any more in my diary. Secrecy of service-related matters and so on. I'd better stop now. May the 18th, 1938. Today is Wednesday and service ended at 1600 hours. I am now sitting here waiting until someone in this lazy mob starts making coffee. We have some of the worst blighters here on the staff, the worst being Hörsting, Beihoff and Michaelis, and all of them are in our room. In the evening there was sporting exercise, a handball match, team of the signals platoon versus team of the light platoon. Our lot lost big time. Last week it was we who won the game. Later we played dodgeball, which is always a lot of fun. Some of the comrades haven't played that before. I took a 3-kilo medicine ball in the face, thrown by Beihoff with maximum force. That was a nice feeling. Today we filed our applications for leave on Whitsun. It all has to be done according to the book. They have pinned a sample application to the board and we have to copy that to the letter. Later, Lieutenant Ehrenberg told me that non-swimmers will not be allowed to take leave. This seems to me an acute problem. Yesterday evening there was an extra swimming lesson in the indoor pool, but hardly anyone went in. All afraid of the cold water, I guess. At midnight there was an alarm and we were thrown out of bed. Following that, we drove around in the Kfz 17 until 0400, then we had to send a number of messages. All went well, and at 0415 we assembled at Benhausen for debriefing. And with this audio cue, I am letting you know that the after action report begins. In this short postscript segment, I will tell you about things in the episode which I find interesting or relatable. I always conclude every episode in this way to give it a personal touch, so let's go. This episode, like most first episodes, brings back a lot of memories from my own time of initial training within the German army. Things like meager conscript pay, although I got a lot more having been an officer candidate, the strict daily routine with PT and the like, as well as meeting lots of new people. Same goes for surprise inspections by my platoon commander or even the Spieß himself. The so-called Spieß is the German equivalent of the company sergeant major, and he is a force to be reckoned with, which I assume is the same in every other army. In Germany, we call the CSM the Spieß, which literally means pike, like the long and pointy stick that was used to impale charging cavalry. Which is an apt description because the Spieß could easily impale anyone with words alone and could also easily chew up and spit out junior officers, even though they technically outranked him. Thankfully, in today's German army you can spot the Spieß from a mile away because he is wearing a golden cord around his right shoulder. On screen I have put a Fallschirmjäger Spieß, in this case Oberstabsfeldwebel, which is the sergeant major, Hasselmann, who has mastered the Spieß stare, as you can see, as he is staring directly into your soul via this press photograph. The Spieß stare being the equivalent of the knife hand, but without words. You can also stop typing your comment right now. I know that Fallschirmjäger usually wear the burgundy red beret, but this man is stationed at a training battalion for NCOs, and all members of a training battalion wear the ultramarine blue berets nowadays. This usually causes a bit of a bad mood with the senior members that get transferred as instructors, as they are usually very proud of their branch berets. I would be too. Another thing we have heard a lot about were the Wehrmacht Kraftfahrsport-Meisterschaften, which is probably the most German compound noun ever. I'd never heard of these before and did not manage to find out more about them, but they did exist, as you can see by the magazine cover I found. And finally, our boy here getting car sick while being stationed in a motorized unit is ironic, but I'm sure he will manage later. With tankers nowadays, you usually only get the gunner's sickness, which happens when you have to look through the gun optic, which of course is stabilized, while the tank meanders through and across the terrain. Gunner's sickness is extra scary because in the Leopard 2 the gunner sits below the commander and can only get out if the commander gets out also, which isn't always practical. Most Leo 2 crew I know just threw up in the bilge as a consequence. So, this is it for today's episode. I hope you're happy with my choice of book. Let me know in the comments what you think. Also, consider subscribing to please the algorithm. I will see you next time. Cheers.